Hey everyone, welcome to the first episode of the Slice of Construction podcast. I'm your host, Jared Taylor. Let's dive in. Tell us about your background.
Thanks, Jared. Aleks Gampel here, one of the co-founders of Cuby Technologies. Why don't I start with Cuby first? Cuby is a full stack technology company that develops scalable hardware and software systems for creating automation and improvements in the new home construction space. My background is in private equity real estate and development, and I always like to joke. I used to jump between technology and real estate, given I have an engineering background, but I've also, on top of my real estate career, helped build venture-backed operating companies that have sat on top of real estate. So I've developed kind of a niche of speaking both languages really fluidly. My partner's background is a lot more technical than mine. He comes from 20 years of building deep tech businesses. By deep tech, I mean uh, really tough hardware businesses that need to scale to mass production. So he's built lean manufacturing systems like no other to date.
For our audience, tell us what the original problem was. How were people doing it before QB came along?
Yeah, so we play in the construction ecosystem, although we think of ourselves more as a manufacturing company, but we generally play in the construction ecosystem, which of course is the biggest sector of any economy. If you step into any country, including the US, it employs the most people. There's the most amount of dollars by volume, most impact if you think about what construction does for society, which is we live, work, and play in buildings. But it has a massive problem. That problem is two-sided. I'll cover first the first side. So the value added by a construction worker today is roughly 40% less than in 1970. It's kind of wild to think about considering the technological improvements in every other industry from a productivity and efficiency perspective. Every other industry aside from construction has 7 to 8x in terms of productivity. And like I said, it's really wild to think about that today's construction workers are performing worse than they did in the 70s. On top of that, 41% of the construction workforce will retire by 2031. Um, and it's because one new worker is replacing every seven that retire now. So young people like you and I, Jared, they don't want to be construction workers. So we have this massive deficit of folks that don't exist that are needed. I think there's almost 1.5 million workers that are needed today to build on the things that we need to build on. So again, there's a massive productivity problem and there's a massive shortage of skilled labor in construction. On the other end of it, because of this shortage, we've been underbuilding for decades now in the housing space. So the US alone needs 6.5 million new homes by 2030. And since the Great Recession, the US has experienced this dramatic shortfall of housing supply relative to the demand. And because of this, it's now pretty unattainable both for owners and renters to either buy or rent a home. It's mainly attributed to the fact that that dollar that it costs to build a building is related to that skilled labor that's missing from the ecosystem. So we're reaching this untenable position as a nation, and we need to do something about it. So either we need to demand less homes, meaning there needs to be less homes that we require, which isn't going to happen because new house formations are increasing by a factor of about 10%. And that's likely not going to stop. So we need to build more productively. Existing incumbents, so general contractors, they'll do billions of dollars in revenue, but their margins are pretty thin, so they can't reinvest those dollars into R&D. Therefore, they're likely not going to come up with a more productive solution. If you look at home builders, same story there. They already produce pretty efficiently. They just don't have great margins and they don't have enough skilled labor to actually build enough to drown that demand that's needed with supply. There's a lot of companies for the last, let's say, 2 decades that are backed by tons of venture that have tried to what's called industrialized construction, meaning how do you apply what Henry Ford has done for the assembly line to cars? How do you apply that to housing? Um, we look at it as three categories, at least internally. So everyone has seen, and actually a lot from your audience who likely looks at social media, they've seen 3D printing, big notorious fix to construction. We don't take 3D printing too seriously in the sense that 3D printing simply solves the framing elements of building a home, which is less than 10% of the actual process it takes to build a home. The rest is still done by that missing skilled labor that we just talked about in a very traditional fashion. Therefore, it's very little automation and very little debundling from that skilled labor that's missing. On top of that, there's regulatory issues because you're using new methods and new materials to construct. On top of that, it's not any cheaper than existing construction today. Therefore, incumbents have no incentive to adopt it. So 3D printing is not how we see tomorrow's solution solving for the millions of homes we need to build. So let's put that one to the side. The second form of industrializing construction comes in the shape and form, literally, of a volumetric box. So if you or your audience have ever seen a hotel being stacked on top, once it's built in a factory, literal rooms, we're talking about some gigafactory that costs $70 million, gets launched in some centralized location, and produces entire rooms off-site. And those rooms are then shipped to the construction site and stacked on top, bolted together. Couple issues there as to why that space is not scaled and has not really penetrated the market like it should. One, you have these gigafactories that don't scale well. What I mean by that is they're really capital intensive, they're hard to replicate. Sadly, when you step foot in them, not real lean manufacturing happening, meaning automation, just that same skilled labor swinging a hammer, wearing steel toe boots. On top of that, there's issues around practicality where, as you can imagine, sending a pen to someone's address makes sense. You can pack it, flat pack it, send it, etc. Talking about a building, there's millions of square feet, millions of tons. Hard to ship that, especially thousands of miles. You need oversized trucks that need supervision, just very uncoordinated, impractical process. On top of that, modular to date has not been cheaper than existing construction. Again, it may be quicker, it may be more repeatable in terms of quality, but it has not been cheaper. And there's a massive thesis, at least, that we've taken that none of this matters unless you can build cheaper than existing construction today, because why would incumbents take the inherent risk on something new if they can't benefit from it from a yield on cost perspective? So we don't think volumetric modular works for more specifically single family homes because there's a lot of customization that needs to happen and there's all these impractical variables that exist today. So we put that one to the side. It might work for hotels and student housing where you have this repeatable product archetype, building the same room every time, if you will. So we think the solution looks more like Legos. So imagine you can produce a kit of parts and you can put those kit of parts together on site. We think that's where the industry is going, and that's called, there's different words for it, but 2D prefab, panelized approaches, etc. We place somewhere between, Cuby, our company, placed somewhere between traditional construction, very, very boring traditional construction, how things have been done, and somewhere between this prefab approach. That's how things have been done to date.
Can you give me a real world example? Like, so let's say I'm your ideal customer. I know you can work with a couple different customer types, but let's say I'm the ideal customer. Who is the ideal customer? And then let's put me in their shoes as if I need to use Cuby. What does that whole process look like in getting started?
So before I answer that, a couple of key bets relative to where the problem is and what we're trying to do different. So we knew that lean manufacturing has helped many industries become more productive. So we know that that's the right approach. The question was, how do we make it work without gigafactories that are centralized? How do we close the gap on the impracticality around the logistics risk that exists with those thousands of miles in between? So the key bets that we've made include one, developing what we call a mobile microfactory, meaning that our product, and I think it's akin to what Elon Musk has said many times about Tesla, which we think Tesla is a terrible example for us, but he's been very adamant about the fact that their product is not the Model 3, it's not the Model Y, it's the, in quotes, the machine that builds the machine. So it's about building all the infrastructure required to build their factories and then replicate those factories. So our product was a mobile microfactory, and essentially it's exactly what your audience can picture it being. Imagine there's a factory in a box that you can erect on a rented parking lot and create this assembly line, if you will, to produce a kit of parts that go into a home. So all the building blocks that make up the home that you're sitting in today, we either one, produce those parts from scratch, think a window, a framing element, a foundation system, so things we take from raw input to finished good and we produce, or two, inside these mobile microfactories, we're simply prepping certain materials that go into a home. So we're pre-cutting the sheetrock behind you, we're prepping the PEX pipes that go into the plumbing, so things we just prep that exist off the shelf. And what we do with those kit of parts is we then palletize them and in different stages send them down the road to then get put together on the construction site with our unskilled labor. We reduce the cost significantly of our homes and how they're put together and how they're assembled and manufactured because we reduce the skilled labor hours required to build a home. That's relevant because skilled labor is that missing coefficient that I described, and it consists of about 70% of that dollar that it costs to build, and that's what we reduce to bring down the cost. So part of our innovation is also our business model and one of the key bets we're making. So when you ask who our customer is, it ties into the business model. Because our product is the factory, we're solely focused on getting as many mobile micro factories out into the real world as possible. So our goal is about a mandate of 300 of them in the next 5 to 7 years. So our customer is someone that we partner with to launch a mobile microfactory. So a local operator, whether it's a general contractor, a developer, a home builder, it could be the Taylor family office, it could be a private equity group that focuses on industrials and manufacturing. So anyone that we capitalize an SPV with and launch a factory. And I can't say the costs out loud, but our cost to launch a factory is a very nominal amount relative to any factory in any industry. And that's part of our innovation and why we vertically integrate and we produce all the machines and the factory itself in-house. So the factory and our customers, anyone that we launch a factory with. The factory, once operational and locally available, its customers become Bob Smith, the home builder. So everyone in our space historically has tried to target these massive home builders. So the top 20 home builders make up about 30% of the market in the US. Think Toll Brothers or Lennar, names you would have recognized. They build very efficiently already. Everyone tries to target them. That's a company trying to transform the space a bit. We've taken a different approach. We think there's a massive market available for folks that specifically, I think, enlist this to your audience, which is Bob Smith, the home builder that builds 20, 30, 40 homes a year in that local market. That's who's struggling with cost the most. That's who's struggling with the general contractors, the subs, and has little margins. That's who we're helping. And we help that individual by being a full turnkey solution when it comes to them building a home. They're really good sales engines, but they're terrible builders generally in terms of efficiency. So we are the GC, the sub, all in one. So someone comes to us, we sell them a bunch of homes in that market within a 300-mile radius of the factory.
And in this space, what are some of the biggest challenges that maybe you faced in the early days and that still exist today? Because you're working to innovate in construction, which is not in manufacturing, right? But those are not easy places to continue to innovate in. So talk us through kind of what those challenges look like.
Hands down, and I come from real estate, so I know this because I was sitting on the other end of this many times. This is by far the most conservative industry and the one that adopts in the slowest possible manner for a couple of reasons. I mean, there's many reasons why, but a couple of reasons: makes money, right? Like you look at the top 10 home builders and you look at their stock performance in the last 2 years, they've crushed it. Doesn't matter what happens with interest rates. Doesn't happen if how inefficient they are. It doesn't matter what's happening. It's the whole reason they keep outperforming is because there's just so much demand. They can keep delivering and it keeps getting absorbed. Does not matter what's happening. So there's no need to change when you're making money. So for a lot of reasons, top 10 home builders haven't needed to change. But it is a hard demographic to sell into. It's very conservative. There's all these regulatory bodies that control the way you can build. So you have to innovate within those parameters. A lot of folks have not done that. A lot of folks have tried to, I guess, reinvent the wheel, whereas we're simply trying to make it move a bit faster. And we haven't changed the end product, which is very important. We build the same home that, say, Lennar builds, except we do it. The only difference is, for example, instead of timber or wood, we use steel framing because we can afford to, and because steel is a non-bipolar material, whereas wood is very tough to automate around, and it's not locally available, which is very important. Therefore, it fluctuates in price, unlike steel. But anyways, it's a very hard demographic to sell into. It's very conservative. That's one big problem. Two, I think naturally, given what needs to happen here, which is what's called a full stack approach, you have to do everything from make software to hardware in-house. It's always a lot harder, takes a lot longer, and more capital intensive than you expect it to be. That's why generally we get flung into this category of venture called deep tech, even though what we've done is de-risk all the technical risk to date, and it's just execution risk at this point. So those are my two big things as to why it's hard.
And my last question, what's next for the company? What's next that really excites you that you can share with us here today?
I think just to give context, we've spent about 3.5 years on this to date, poured our lives into it. We've poured a lot of our own capital into it, and we've spent now 340,000 engineering hours. Have about 130 folks on the team now, and that's relevant because, I'll give context. It takes about 700,000 engineering hours to build a fighter jet. So there's been a lot of technical de-risking when it comes to designing, engineering, manufacturing, testing all the machines that go inside the mobile microfactory, which then produce the kit of parts I described. We've set up a manufacturing arm. We've set up our first mobile microfactory. Now we're commercializing for the first time, meaning we're starting to produce case studies of homes, therefore validating our cost, the idea that we can build a home for $100 a foot with 4 unskilled people in 30 days. We're now starting to sign contracts for mobile microfactories. We're targeting the first one to go to Detroit, which should be pretty exciting, given most of our operations to date have been in Eastern Europe, which is how we've de-risked a lot of the capital intensity. But the goal is 300 of these puppies in the next 5 to 7 years.
Well, I'm excited for us to stay in touch and to continue to follow your journey throughout building this company. And kudos to you and the team for what you've built today. And I hope we can have you come back on again real soon. And thanks for being guest number one.
Appreciate it. Next time we'll have to get you to tour either the R&D facility or one of these mobile microfactories or a house.
I would love it. We'll make it like cribs, but this manufacturing facility.
Exactly.
That'd be awesome. Thanks so much.